It all kicks off on Christmas Eve, with the streets covered in snow and packed with people, soaking up the festive atmosphere. The city's vibe is cheerful, with bright decorations sparkling everywhere. A family walks by together, and their little daughter cheers that it was the best day ever. They stroll along happily, walking right past a lonely man just watching the scene unfold. The little girl is in awe, looking around, absolutely enchanted by the lights. Jo-won watches the family and wonders why he always has to be the one to shrink himself to make way for others. Walking through the crowd, it feels almost natural to him that he's the only person all alone on that entire street. With that thought, our protagonist continues on his way, heading down the stairs toward the subway. But suddenly he stops dead in his tracks. He notices something unusual and is taken completely by surprise. Nearby, he realizes there's another person who's all by themselves on this cold night. It's a Santa Claus kneeling in the snow, looking pretty miserable. A sign asks people to tell the old man a wish, something Jo-won would normally just ignore. However, since this is the exact day his parents passed away and left him all alone, he decides to humor the guy. Pulling his wallet from his pocket, the young man takes out a few bills to donate to the stranger. Handing over the cash, Jo-won offers the money and comments that the bill's still in pretty good shape. He carefully places the money inside the donation box. Surprisingly, the Santa Claus grabs his hands with a tight grip and thanks him for his incredible kindness. The old man insists he wants to return the favor and demands to know the young man's wish. Thinking the guy is completely bonkers, the protagonist tries to pull away from the bizarrely strong grip. But the strength in the stranger's hands is insane, leaving Jo-won in total shock. He tries to yank his arms back with all his might but can't move a single inch. The Santa Claus begs him, explaining that he can't go back to his village until he grants the wish of a kind soul. Just wanting to get out of the situation, the guy agrees to tell him his wish if the man promises to let him go. Facing the old man, he finally starts to formulate his request. He asks to win the lottery, but the man lets out a disappointed sigh and asks for a wish that comes from the bottom of his heart. Jo-won gets serious when he hears that request. In a moment of raw honesty, he confesses that he needs a family that will always be by his side and never abandon him. Gripping the stranger's hand tightly, he specifies that he wants a super cute wife and daughter. The old man gets emotional, claiming he can feel the purity of that wish from such a lonely soul. Feeling incredibly lucky, the Santa Claus says he's found someone with a soul similar to his own. With a creepy look in his eye, he promises to find a pure-hearted wife and a lovely daughter who respects her father. Wishing him a life full of joy, the old man finally releases the young man's hands. Jo-won immediately bolts, cursing the guy for being a complete nutjob. In the background, the man yells that he'll use all his power to grant the wish, which thoroughly freaks our protagonist out. A short time later, the subway train arrives at the station. Once inside the car, the young man grabs onto a support bar to keep his balance during the ride. He rests his head on his arm, trying to figure out what kind of nonsense that crazy guy was spouting. Even though he thinks the guy was nuts, he reflects on the real reason he revealed his deepest desire. Looking at a family ad inside the train, he admits to himself that he just wanted to be happy, too. Worn out from the day, he simply closes his eyes to get a little sleep. Suddenly, he smells something strange, feels an intense cold, and hears the sound of something swaying back and forth. Waking up confused, the protagonist slowly gets up, still feeling dizzy from it all. He opens his eyes in a panic, not understanding a single thing that's happening. Instead of the subway, he's now inside a wooden carriage, rolling through a medieval village. Completely bewildered, Jo-won screams, asking where he is, as he realizes he's been locked in a cage in nothing but his underwear. He sees a man with long, dirty hair. Prisoner looks exhausted and in terrible shape. Looking around, the young man notices several other men in the same situation and thinks he's been sent back to the Middle Ages. At that point, he just freezes, completely baffled by the sheer insanity of it all. Trying to listen to the guards outside, the protagonist realizes he can't understand a single word of their language. Taking in the medieval scenery and the lack of any other Asian people, he tries to process what's going on. Soon, the terrifying conclusion that he's been dropped into another world hits him. Memories of him fading away in the subway car flash through his mind. Shivering violently from the cold, he huddles barefoot on the cage floor. Noticing a collapsed prisoner, Jo-won realizes the man has already passed and decides to focus on his own survival. Apologizing to the body, he begins to remove the deceased man's clothes. With that, he puts on the dead man's shirt to try and get a little warmer. Now wearing the old clothes, he sits down, exhausted, and remembers the Santa's promise to grant his wish. Lying on the filthy floor, the guy wonders if he completely misunderstood the meaning of happiness the old man mentioned. Hoping it's all just a nightmare, he has no idea how many days have passed since he arrived in this place. The carriage continues its journey, moving endlessly along dirt roads through the forest. Huddled in a corner, the guy concludes that everyone in here is a slave, including himself. Watching the armed guards, he understands why they're being hauled from one place to another. The whole point of this trip is to sell them off as merchandise in different locations. Finally, the lock on the cage is opened. The soldiers line up the prisoners outside while a village chief picks out the healthiest ones. Even though it hurts his pride to admit he's a slave, the protagonist starts to feel a glimmer of hope. Knowing he's in good physical shape, Jo-won believes he'll be bought quickly and will be able to escape. This becomes his first ray of hope since he fell into this bizarre world. But reality hits hard, and he sinks into despair after being rejected by several villages in a row. The journey continues relentlessly, passing through various settlements. The carriage follows the dirt road with the few remaining prisoners. Thrown on the cage floor, he's completely devastated, unable to understand how his life hit rock bottom like this. Remembering his mother's advice to live life to the fullest, the guy questions if there's even any reason to stay alive. Thinking back to his childhood, Jo-won still tries to process whether that whole wish business was for real. Lying on the cage floor, he asks his deceased parents if he'll be able to endure this miserable situation. The old man's promise to use all his power to grant his request echoes in his mind. Furious with all that nonsense, he tells both worlds to go to heck. Clenching his fist tightly, the guy concludes that the only thing that matters right now isn't some romantic wish. That he bangs on the bars, thinking the only real peace would be to just end it all and escape the pain. But he quickly recoils in pain, admitting to himself that's not the answer. Deep down, the protagonist just doesn't want to check out in a hole like this without ever having a family. Completely dejected, he simply accepts his deplorable reality in a heavy silence. Suddenly, a hand appears, holding out a piece of bread toward him. Lifting his head, the guy sees a very kind-looking woman outside the cage offering him food. She says something he can't understand, but her gesture leaves him completely surprised. Right behind her, a super cute little girl shyly watches the scene while holding onto the bars. Even without speaking the language, the protagonist is speechless at the kindness of these two. The scene then cuts to a small, peaceful wooden cabin isolated in the middle of the forest. Inside the house, the woman and little Lizzie are sitting at a table having a simple meal. The little girl drinks her soup very politely, holding the bowl with both hands. Wanting to take good care of the child, the mother pushes a plate with more food toward her. Lizzie silently looks at the food as her stomach lets out a loud rumble. Knowing her mother is also hungry, the girl refuses the offer so the woman can eat. But the mother gently insists, assuring her that the child needs the food just as much as she does. With great affection, she slowly slides the plate back across the table. She tries to reassure her, saying that they'll get through these hard times together. Just then, loud knocks on the door cut through the atmosphere, with the village chief calling from outside. The woman snatches Lizzie into a hug as the man announces that the council has decided to force her to marry one of the slaves. In shock, the woman hears the order that she must take the stranger into the mountains the next day. The elder tells her to prepare food and meet the soldiers at dawn, then leaves. In the darkness of the cabin, the woman panics, terrified at the thought of going back to being beaten by a husband. Trembling with dread, she knows there's no way to escape this village in the middle of nowhere. Looking at the sleeping girl in her lap, she decides she could never abandon the little one. Clutching her chest, the woman feels she doesn't have the right to leave the child alone in the world again. A painful memory of Lizzie with tears in her eyes floods her mind. The memory of the little girl's desperate, crying simply breaks the mother's heart. Back then, the poor little girl would be completely isolated, sobbing on the floor. Remembering her own youth, the woman recalls the terrible fear of not knowing what her future held. Huddled in a corner of the house, she suffers deeply just thinking about reliving that whole nightmare. Still, her sadness eases a bit when she looks at her daughter. Seeing Lizzie hugging a teddy bear, she understands that abandonment hurts them both the same way. This little 5-year-old orphan lost her father tragically and didn't even have a name until recently. Inevitably, the woman remembers the day her own father sold her for a single rabbit pelt. As soon as she set foot in the village, her former husband beat her mercilessly before she could even unpack. The man kicked her violently just because she took a little longer than expected to arrive. Attacked over something so trivial, the reality hit her that this cursed life was just beginning. Lying on the floor covered in bruises, the harsh reality completely crushed her spirit. But it was in that exact terrible moment that a small child quietly approached her. Devastated on the wooden floor, the young woman slowly lifted her eyes to understand what was happening. In that living hell, the pure, worried gaze of little Lizzie shone down on her. Without a word, the little girl simply lay down next to her injured body to keep her company. This angel-like little girl was the only one to show the slightest bit of compassion in the entire village. Curiously, the violent husband went into the mountains that day and was never seen again. A rumor soon spread that the abusive man had become Wolf Cho during a hunt. Despite the immense relief of hearing about his demise, a new kind of despair took hold of the widow. She knew all too well how this despicable society worked. Surviving without a husband to maintain her status left her completely defenseless against everyone. Living alone together, the two walk through the village feeling the weight of abandonment and danger. Back in the present at the village entrance, they hear the sound of approaching wheels. With an innocent air, the little one excitedly points to the huge carriage arriving. The two watch intently as the vehicle stops in the middle of the dirt road, kicking up dust. Driven by curiosity, the woman decides to go over and take a closer look. And that's exactly how she comes face to face with Jo-won, caged like an animal. The young man's deeply exhausted and desperate look has a strong and immediate impact on her. In that split second, the terrible memory of her husband attacking her for being useless comes rushing back. Reliving the hair, pulling an angry shout sends a chill straight up her spine. The menacing shadow of that cruel man still haunts her thoughts daily. Faced with someone as broken as she once was, the woman's eyes begin to tear up. She can see in the protagonist the same silent suffering that she and her daughter endured in the past. Acting on pure instinct, the woman takes a small loaf of bread from her straw basket. With the child by her side, the two walk toward the carriage wary of the soldiers. Through the iron bars, the woman extends the food toward the starving slave. Completely surprised, Jo-won freezes at this gesture of compassion in such a dark world. But the peace is short-lived, as men from the village approach, asking if the prisoners have arrived. The elder orders the woman to go home immediately, taking over the reception of the soldiers. Unable to defy the order, the mother calls her daughter, and they turn their backs to the cage. Before leaving for good, the sweet little girl takes one last look at the man in the cage. Holding the bread tightly in his hands, the young man watches the family walk away with a mix of sadness and hope. Jo-won quickly devours the bread, trying to satisfy his hunger inside the cage. But his small meal is cut short when the guards aggressively shout as they open the door. With that, the guy is yanked out of the carriage without the slightest care. He ends up face planting on the ground and dropping his food, his stomach growling loudly from weakness. Taken to an open field, the village leader begins giving instructions to the soldiers. Suddenly, the guards draw their swords and hold them to the slaves kneeling on the grass. Using his blade, one of the soldiers cuts the ropes binding a prisoner's hands. Right after, he activates some kind of magic contract that glows brightly in the air. Completely exhausted, the protagonist just sighs, having no idea what kind of world he's landed in. Further ahead, a guard approaches another, older slave to begin the process. Jo-won remains on his knees on the ground, passively waiting for his turn. In silence, he just watches the activity around him. The scene cuts to a peaceful view of trees swaying near the wooden village. Large sack of supplies is left on the ground, with the order that it must be taken to the cabin. The woman hears from the elder that she'll have to pay for everything later, as the village is fronting the initial supplies. The old woman is blunt, mentioning that the entire village hated the man who died. She hopes the new partner will be different, believing he might just be a commoner. Sitting on the floor with her daughter, the mother hears that the outsider has soft hands like a nobleman's. Holding the young woman's hands, the old lady assures her that someone like that has never hit anyone. A little more relieved, the woman thanks her and says she doesn't need much to live well. She confesses that her only hope is that this man isn't aggressive. Cuddled up with little Lizzie in bed, the woman accepts that as long as he leaves them in peace in some corner, it's enough. Suddenly, very loud knocks on the cabin door shatter the morning silence. The woman wakes with a start and jumps up, clutching the little girl in her arms. With that, the wooden door is violently thrown open, causing a huge surprise. The village chief appears in the doorway, announcing he has finally brought the promised husband. Very tense, she just nods at the elder's order to bring the man inside. Jo-won walks through the door completely disoriented, trying to figure out where the heck he is. The chief shoves the guy, annoyed, complaining about how long it took him to enter the house. Huddled on the floor, the woman tries to absorb the fact that this stranger will be her husband. Looking at the guy's size, she feels quite intimidated by his presence in the room. Soon, Jo-won also focuses his attention on the two figures huddled in the corner. He quickly recognizes her as the same person who offered him food earlier. However, the protagonist soon notices that the woman is trembling with fear. Losing patience, the village chief gives the guy a push on the back, demanding some action. With a violent tug, the elder drags him directly over to the woman. So the two side by side in a very clumsy manner. Complaining about the couple's lack of enthusiasm, the old man grabs their hands without any warning. With a quick movement, the leader forces the young man's and woman's hands together. Satisfied with the result, the man laughs and says that now they look like a real couple. Jo-won is very confused by the whole situation, as he doesn't understand a single word of the language. The bizarre memory of Santa Claus promising him a pure wife and an obedient daughter flashes through his mind. Looking at the scared young mother, he pictures her as a small, harmless rabbit. He looks at the little girl and compares her to a tiny, defenseless hamster. Standing there holding the woman's hand, it finally clicks that the crazy old man fulfilled his promise. Looking at this fragile family, he admits that his wish came true. But the memories of the hell he endured locked in that cage come back to haunt him. The guy clenches his fists, thinking it was completely unnecessary to be thrown into another world like that. Overcome by a massive wave of fury, he promises to take out that Santa Claus if he ever sees him again. His murderous, angry aura deeply frightens the woman and little Lizzie. Jo-won follows the leader and an older hunter on a trail through the forest. Walking right behind them, the guy is already going crazy from not understanding a single thing they're saying. Suddenly, the older hunter stops walking and turns toward the protagonist. The man extends his hand in a friendly gesture, surprising the outsider a little. Believing it's a common greeting, the guy reciprocates and shakes the villager's hand. However, the man squeezes with an absurd amount of force, making Jo-won wonder if this is the local way of saying hello. Soon, the protagonist notices the malice in the hunter's eyes and understands he's being tested. With that, he decides to squeeze back with much more force, making the man scream in desperation. The hunter falls to his knees, crying in pain, feeling the bones in his hand nearly shatter. After letting the man go, Jo-won watches him writhing in agony on the grass while the elder keeps talking. Still trembling, the hunter hands a simple wooden bow to the guy. With the weapon in hand, Jo-won finds the gesture strange but concludes they don't want to fight. The villager points into the woods and makes a bizarre gesture with his hands on his head. Crouching down, the man imitates a leaping animal, completely embarrassing himself in front of the other two. Understanding the ridiculous charade, the protagonist deduces that he needs to learn how to hunt rabbits. Suddenly, the hunter grabs the outsider's shoulder firmly to get his attention. Pointing excitedly into the vegetation, he indicates that he's found the perfect target. Hidden among the leaves, a cute, white rabbit peacefully chews on grass. The man tells him to shoot immediately, making the guy tense up since he's never used a bow in his life. Kneeling on the ground, he positions the arrow, wondering how he's going to hit something so small. Focusing all his strength, Jo-won pulls the bowstring to its limit, aiming at the animal. The arrow is released with incredible speed, flying right past the rabbit and embedding itself violently in the ground. The hunter and the guy are left with their mouths wide open at the damage caused by the insane impact. In total shock, the protagonist stares at his own hands, trying to understand what that crazy strength was. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, the woman and little Lizzie anxiously await the man's return. Surprised by the damage he caused, Jo-won just stares at his own display of strength, not quite believing it. A bit embarrassed by the whole situation, he just scratches his face, trying to play off the absurd thing that just happened. At that moment, the guy sees the woman approaching with little Lizzie and reflects that she is now his wife. His heart beats a little faster as he faces this new, fragile reality head-on. The hunter is still terrified in the background, while the family just watches the scene from a distance, not understanding a thing. The three of them sit together on a blanket in the forest for a quiet meal. Jo-won devours his food quickly under the watchful, silent gazes of the woman and the little girl. Holding his bowl of stew, he focuses on regaining his energy after so much stress in the cage. While the protagonist eats with gusto, the woman eats much more reservedly and shyly. Finishing her meal, she politely wipes her mouth, causing the guy to pause his own eating to watch. He remains silent for a moment, just taking in the company of these two. Soon, a sense of calm washes over him at the peaceful scene. Spending time with them, the guy admits that the word family has always felt foreign to him since he was a teenager. However, he reflects that an entire family was practically handed to a lonely guy like him on a silver platter. Logically, it would have been better if it had all happened naturally, but given the crazy circumstances, he figures the order of events doesn't matter that much. With a heavy sigh, the protagonist admits that he wants to throttle that Santa Claus but, at the same time, feels a sense of gratitude. Resting on the grass, he mentally thanks the old man for keeping his bizarre Christmas Eve promise. After this short break, their journey continues at a much faster pace along the trail. Carrying the heavy sacks of supplies, Jo-won walks ahead, wondering if the two of them are managing to keep up. Right behind him, the woman and little Lizzie walk, out of breath, clearly exhausted from the long journey. Seeing their fatigue, the guy gets very frustrated that he can't even ask if they're okay because of the language barrier. Determined to change that, he vows to himself that he needs to adapt to this world as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the outsider stops firmly in the middle of the dirt road. An old memory of his mother surfaces, teaching him to never hesitate when there's someone to protect. In the bright memory, she assures him that her son must act immediately the moment he feels the urge to care for someone. Motivated by this memory, Jo-won looks over his shoulder toward his new family. Without a second thought, he turns around and walks directly toward the tired woman and child. Seeing the giant man approaching, little Lizzie gets terrified and lets out a whimper of fear. Trying to be as gentle as possible, the guy kneels in front of the little girl, asking her not to be scared by his approach. The girl's mother is in complete shock, fearing that something aggressive is about to happen. Acting on pure protective instinct, the woman steps in front of her daughter, desperately saying something to try and stop the outsider. Hiding behind her mother, the little girl trembles and cries softly, thinking they're about to be hit. Seeing their absolute panic, the protagonist realizes he shouldn't have approached them with such a serious expression. Here he asks to be excused for a moment as he moves toward them. In a swift but careful motion, Jowon lifts little Lizzie into his arms. Immediately after, he wraps his other arm around the mother, lifting the young woman off the ground with no difficulty at all. Now the guy is carrying the heavy sacks of supplies on his back and his entire family in his arms. Standing in the middle of the trail, holding all that weight, he doesn't show the slightest sign of physical strain. Settled in his arms, the little girl's eyes go wide, completely confused by the big guy's actions. On the other side, the woman is also speechless, not understanding why she's being carried like this. Appearing calm, the protagonist just tells them both to hold on tight. He starts walking through the forest again as if it were nothing, finding the weight of the two of them absurdly light. Bothered by how thin his family is, he concludes that he needs to learn to hunt quickly to feed them meat. Looking at the woman's face so close to his, Jowon realizes he has a gigantic job ahead of him to keep them all well. Feeling the safety of that warm embrace, the woman slowly rests her head on his shoulder. She clutches the fabric of the guy's shirt tightly, finding a comfort there she never imagined she would have. Nestled in her new husband's arms, the young woman watches him silently with a much more serene gaze. The walk continues peacefully along the trail, following the village elder toward their new home. They finally arrive at the isolated cabin, with the chief saying his goodbyes and thanking them for the company. The old man turns and walks away, leaving the new family alone in front of the simple residence. Assessing the deplorable state of the wooden house, the guy fears it might be even colder than his old rented room. A memory of him chattering his teeth in the cold winter comes to mind, reinforcing how much he hates low temperatures. Pushing his worries aside for a moment, he places his hand on the rustic doorknob. As he pushes the door open to enter, Jowon lets out a surprised gasp at what he sees inside. Right behind him, the woman enters the cabin and freezes, completely paralyzed with shock. Confused by her intense reaction, the protagonist quickly asks what's wrong and why she's suddenly crying. Unable to hold back, the woman runs right past him into the house. The guy watches her frantic movements, not understanding a single thing that's happening. Standing in the doorway, he observes the empty room, trying to process the scale of the problem. He then discovers that the villagers broke in and stole absolutely all their furniture and survival tools. Anguished by the cowardly looting, the protagonist concludes they have no way to fix the house or defend themselves from wild animals. Going out to the back of the property, he finds his wife collapsed on the forest floor. Trying to offer some comfort, Jowon calmly sits down beside her on the grass. Very gently, the guy reaches out and starts stroking the woman's head. Caressing her brown hair, he tries to soothe the tears of someone who has just lost everything. Looking into her eyes, he gently asks the young woman not to worry about the situation. Crying hard, the woman senses he's trying to reassure her and reflects on this strange partner. She thinks about the immense difficulty of not even being able to communicate properly and his lack of hunting skills. The doubt of whether they can survive together in this cruel place consumes the young mother's mind. However, the soft, confident expression on the guy's face shatters all the tension of the tragic moment. With a very warm smile, Jowon promises from the bottom of his heart that he will protect her from everything. Even anxious and full of fears about tomorrow, she receptively gives into his affection. A tear slides down her face as a comforting feeling takes over her broken heart. Bathed in the late afternoon light, the guy wipes his wife's face with the utmost tenderness. Faced with so much care from a stranger, she completely relaxes and wonders why she feels so relieved by his side. The protagonist hugs the young woman as he reflects on his original world, remembering he lived completely alone since his parents passed away. Despite all that loneliness and hardship, the guy fought hard and endured it all just to keep surviving. Analyzing his new situation, he understands that he now has a family, and there's no reason he can't handle the challenges ahead. To reassure her, Jowon tells her not to worry, promising to do whatever it takes to support them. Without understanding his words, the young woman just cries softly as she leans on his shoulder. Suddenly, a loud noise in the bushes catches the guy's attention, and he turns his head, confused, while the woman remains in his arms. In a desperate leap toward them, the little girl trips and bursts into tears, pleading in her own language for the big man not to hurt her mother. The little one throws herself against the outsider's leg, holding on tight and trying to protect the woman with all her childish strength. Surprised by the child's action, the protagonist sits frozen on the forest floor, just watching the two of them cry near him. Looking at the scene, he thinks about how surreal it is to have a crying woman suddenly seeking comfort in his arms. On top of that, a little girl is crying while clinging to him, trying to defend her mother, making the whole situation extremely unfamiliar to the guy. With his head full of questions, he wonders who this child is and why that woman decided to offer him bread earlier. Gently wiping the tears from her face, the man also wonders what made her break down in tears like that. But putting the uncertainties aside, Jo-won believes that if they continue to live together and make an effort, they will surely become a good family. Holding the young woman in a protective embrace, the guy mentally vows to make them very happy, swearing to become a good husband and a good father. Still in the middle of the forest, he swears to himself that neither of them will ever regret becoming his family. Sometime later, the sun begins to set on the horizon, bathing the old, isolated wooden cabin in a golden light. Inside the residence, the three of them sit on the floor in absolute silence, a considerable distance apart. Jo-won sighs in frustration, thinking they had gotten closer after all the crying, but now he realizes they're back to square one. Seeing the two of them huddled together and staring at him, he's relieved they're just being cautious instead of terrified, but he has no idea how to break the ice. Just then, a simple idea pops into the protagonist's head, and he raises his index finger, excited by the solution. The guy quickly adjusts his position on the wooden floor, startling the woman and child with his sudden movement. Pointing directly at his own chest, he gives a friendly look and clearly introduces himself, saying the name Kim Jo-won. Pausing between syllables, he repeats the pronunciation to make it easier, concluding they at least need to know each other's names to live together. Realizing the outsider's intention, the young woman shyly and slowly repeats his name, trying to get the strange pronunciation right. Pleased with his success, Jo-won extends his hand toward her and gently asks the woman to tell him her name. The woman hesitates for a brief moment, looking away as she thinks about how to respond to her husband's interaction. A moment later, she points her index finger at her own chest and finally says the name Lizzie for the guy. The protagonist shows great satisfaction with their progress and compliments how nice her name sounds, even though he knows she doesn't understand the full sentence. Turning his attention to the little one huddled in the corner, the big guy points at her, wanting to know the child's name. At his question, Lizzie bows her head in complete silence, leaving the guy confused by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. The little girl also hunches her shoulders with a sad expression, leading Jo-won to ask in shock if she doesn't have a name yet. The mother keeps her gaze downcast, confirming his suspicion that the little one has grown up until now being called whatever. Reaching out, the protagonist gently touches the child's cheek and says he'll give her a name himself, choosing to call her Dorothy. The girl looks up at the big guy with shining eyes, hearing the word Dorothy sound so warm in the small room. The guy based his choice on the character from The Wizard of Oz, a girl who goes on adventures with many friends and finds her own happiness. With this simple gesture, he wishes from the bottom of his heart that the little one becomes an adorable child and has a bright future. Still a bit unsure about the new development, the little girl slowly repeats the name, testing how the word sounds in her own voice. As soon as the sound comes out, Dorothy shows immense joy, eagerly adopting her new identity. The next day, the silence of the forest is broken by the sharp sound of Jo-won's axe chopping wood outside the cabin. Watching the scene from a distance, Lizzie crosses her arms and reflects that this outsider is a truly strange man. She notes that even though he has a much larger and more intimidating body than her late husband, the big guy treats her with extreme gentleness instead of violence. The young woman concludes that this new partner is a completely different person from all the cruel villagers she has ever known. Murmuring the guy's name softly, she admits that she doesn't understand his language, but she notices his pronunciation is refined and his voice has an unusual calmness. Recalling the difficult memories of her past, the woman realizes she had never received a single drop of kindness from anyone before his arrival. As the guy watches her with a friendly expression while he works, Lizzie remains intrigued as to why he is so good to her. Shaking her head, the woman realizes that no matter how hard she tries to understand, this outsider clearly does not belong in this rustic place. Interrupting her thoughts, Jo-won waves with his free hand and cheerfully calls her name. The young woman focuses her gaze on the man's face, paying close attention to the dark color of her new partner's hair and eyes. At that moment, an old rumor crosses her mind, recalling that it was said an enemy nation at war had managed to summon a legendary hero. The legend described this mythical warrior as having deep black hair and eyes, a striking and frightening feature. Stacking the wood, the protagonist walks toward his wife with a very relaxed posture. Staring at his features, the woman can't ignore that the descriptions of the dangerous hero somewhat match the outsider. However, she quickly dismisses this crazy theory, telling herself that someone so powerful would never be lost on this mountain. She figures a true hero would leave surrounded by luxury in a grand palace, not chopping firewood in a miserable village. When the guy gets very close, Lizzie notices that his hair isn't as dark as night but more of a brownish tone. Looking more closely at the big guy's eyes, she realizes their color also doesn't fit the terrible war legends she's heard. The woman lets out a sigh of relief upon concluding that he is just an ordinary man, albeit much larger than the normal peasants. Confused by her own feelings, she wonders why she is feeling so relieved by this silly discovery. After all, they only met today, there's no reason for her to care so much about his true identity. Pushing the doubts from the woman's mind, Jo-won reaches out and affectionately starts stroking the top of her head. The sudden physical contact catches her by surprise, causing the woman to freeze, unaccustomed to this kind of treatment. The young woman remembers that the only reason a man's hand ever approached her face in the past was to deliver a cowardly blow. The protagonist continues to gently stroke his wife's brown hair, using slow, comforting movements under the afternoon sun. Surrendering to the pleasant sensation, Lizzie's eyes grow heavy, and she admits deep in her soul that she wants more of this. With her heart racing, the woman just stands there receiving the touch, silently praying that he never stops caressing her. The guy lowers his face to look at her better, his cheeks slightly flushed from their silent proximity. Slowly lifting her gaze, Lizzie shows a completely surrendered expression, her eyes shining with enchantment for her new husband. Completely enveloped by the magical atmosphere of the forest, their bodies naturally draw closer, and they finally press their lips together. The touch is simple and direct, sealing the promise of care and affection that Jo-won has made since he arrived in this world. But right after, the protagonist jerks his head back, his eyes wide and his face burning with embarrassment. The shock of reality hits the outsider full force, leaving him completely paralyzed and panicking over his own impulsive action. Turning his face to the side, the guy stammers a few disconnected syllables, unable to look his wife in the eye after the unexpected kiss. Desperate to escape the immense shame, he quickly turns around and runs toward his work tools. Without any explanation, Jo-won grabs the handle of a wooden bucket tightly, looking for any excuse to get out of there immediately. The protagonist dashes off into the forest carrying the bucket, fleeing as fast as he can from the awkward situation. Left behind, Lizzie clutches her hands to her chest, completely shocked and with her face burning with embarrassment over his sudden action. Now in the middle of the trees, the big guy walks along, mentally cursing himself for doing something so crazy, worried about the impression his wife now has of him. He smacks his own forehead, remembering that although they are married, they had just met that very day. On top of not even being able to communicate properly, the guy has absolutely no idea what to do and considers just pretending nothing happened. But suddenly, he stops walking in the middle of the path. Looking around, Jo-won realizes the landscape has completely changed, leaving him confused about how far he's walked and where exactly he's ended up. The surrounding forest becomes much denser and darker, with the sound of the wind whipping through the trees, creating a very spooky atmosphere. Trying to stay calm, the outsider decides to just grab some water quickly and head back to the cabin. At that moment, he's startled by a sinister presence right there. Emerging from the dark bushes, a huge, black-furred creature blocks his path. The animal reveals itself to be a gigantic wolf with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. Growling aggressively, the beast forces the guy to take a step back, completely frozen with fear. He stares at the massive predator, a chill running down his spine as he notes the creature's unreal size. Unable to even react, the outsider drops to his knees, letting go of the bucket, paralyzed before his imminent end. Grasping for any chance of survival, Jo-won quickly grabs a thick branch that was lying on the ground beside him. Without wasting a second, the wolf lunges forward, opening its giant maw to devour its prey. Using the piece of wood as a shield, the guy manages to block the bite aimed right at his neck. He screams desperately as he struggles to keep the beast's teeth away from his face. With a loud crack, the wood can't withstand the brutal pressure and snaps in half. Seizing the opening, the wolf sinks its fangs into the protagonist's left arm, who curses, feeling an unbearable pain. Even injured, he refuses to give up and shouts, asking if the beast thinks he's just going to die there. Winding up a punch with his free arm, the outsider declares with fury that he is definitely not going to lose his life. The blow lands squarely on the animal's face, but the impact ends up injuring the guy's own hand. His teeth in agony, Jo-won feels as if his entire body is on fire. Suddenly, he opens his eyes, shocked by what has just happened. A bright, intense flame erupts out of nowhere right between him and the wild animal. Looking at his own right arm, the guy sees that it's completely engulfed in a mysterious fire. Startled by the sudden heat, the beast releases his arm and quickly leaps back. The wolf howls in pain as it tries to deal with the burns left on its snout by the fiery explosion. On impulse, the protagonist shoves his flaming arm forward, unleashing a blast of fire that completely engulfs the beast. A moment later, the giant wolf drops lifelessly to the forest floor, its body charred and smoking. Jo-won collapses onto his back on the grass, completely exhausted, trying to process what just happened after seeing his own arm catch fire. He raises his right hand and examines the skin very carefully. Noticing that his clothes are intact and without a single burn, the guy starts to suspect he might have used some kind of magic. At that moment, he remembers that falling into another world and gaining powers is a very common trope in fantasy novels. Imagining that classic scenario with heroes and mages, the outsider thinks his situation fits the bill perfectly. Staring at the palm of his hand, he decides to run a practical test, just in case this absurd theory is true. Pointing his arm confidently toward the sky, Jo-won shouts, summoning a fireball. He repeats the command several times in different poses throughout the forest, but absolutely nothing happens. Lying on the grass again, the guy tries to command firestorms and walls of flame into the air. Facing the dead wolf, he even tries a dragon's breath and summons earth spirits in search of a spark. After trying for so long, the big guy looks bored, realizing he's just making a fool of himself. But as he looks at his left arm, he concludes it wasn't an illusion, as the bite wounds have healed a bit thanks to this mysterious power. Excited by the discovery, he imagines that if he can use this magic freely, he can hunt and provide a much more abundant and happy life for his new family. Lying there, Jo-won also thinks he could treat any of their illnesses with magic, since there are no doctors in this isolated village. Jumping up from the ground, he decides not to rush things and to analyze this whole situation more calmly. However, painful memories flood his mind, recalling the time his grandfather passed away in a bizarre accident right after his parents' death. Back then, his relatives physically abused him during his grief, blaming him for all the tragedies. Humiliated on the floor, the boy had to listen to his uncle's claim that the family only died because they lived near him. Surrounded by the adults' hatred, the young protagonist silently accepted being blamed for all the misfortunes. Back in the present, the outsider's gaze turns melancholic as he remembers being treated like a deadly plague when he was still in high school. Pushing away these bad memories, he grabs the wolf's leg, deciding to focus on the present to prevent other beasts from smelling the blood. Throwing the immense carcass over his shoulders, the guy concludes that he can at least skin it before heading home. Walking with that absurd weight on his back, he mentally thanks his grandfather for teaching him how to butcher chickens and rabbits in the past. Under the light of the full moon, Jo-won feels a great sense of peace, imagining how proud the old man would be to see him handling the situation so well. As he continues on his way back, the big guy once again racks his brain, trying to figure out how he's going to train these magical abilities. Far away, the atmosphere inside the small wooden cabin remains warm and cozy near the wood, burning stove. Preparing dinner with great excitement, Lizzie affectionately asks the little girl to hand her a bowl. As soon as the little one complies, the woman thanks her, using the new name Dorothy very naturally. Getting a nice pat on the head, the girl agrees happily, proud to be helping her mother in the kitchen. She runs excitedly through the room but suddenly stops when she notices strange movement outside. Curious, the child leans on the edge of the wooden window to peek into the dark forest. Dorothy squints, trying to see what's approaching in the middle of the night. Suddenly, the terrifying head of the giant wolf appears right at the window, making the girl let out a deafening scream of terror. The little girl runs back, crying in despair, believing the monster outside is about to break into the house. Hearing her daughter's panic, Lizzie doesn't think twice and grabs the kitchen knife she was using at the counter. Wielding the weapon, the woman runs toward the child, telling her to get away from the window as fast as possible. However, when she looks outside, the young woman is completely shocked by what she finds. Emerging from the shadows, Jo-won finally arrives in the cabin's yard, carrying the immense carcass on his back. Believing her husband is being attacked, Lizzie screams desperately as she runs for the exit. She bursts through the door, calling for the big guy, who drops the animal's dead body onto the yard floor. Seeing that the beast was already dead and the outsider was in no danger, the woman freezes in her tracks with the little girl hiding behind her. Lizzie stands motionless, holding the blade, unable to process the fact that he took down a monster like that all by himself. In a state of shock, her fingers relax, and the knife falls to the dirt with a metallic clank. Gently holding Lizzie's shoulders, Jo-won tries to calm her down, assuring her that everything is fine and he wasn't seriously injured. Little Dorothy approaches, crying hard, and tightly hugs the big guy's leg. He looks into his wife's eyes and promises that he only got a bite on the arm, and it's already completely healed. Now sitting on the lawn, the outsider hugs them both, reassuring his family and telling them not to worry. Suddenly, the young woman tightens the hug, hiding her face in his chest, which surprises the guy. Greatly relieved, she cries softly, repeating over and over how happy she is that he's safe. Noticing that the little girl is also murmuring similar words of concern, the protagonist feels the weight of their warm reception. Watching them both cry, he swears to himself that he will do everything to never let them get that scared again. The day breaks peacefully, illuminating the forest around the small wooden cabin. In the daylight, the outsider places the wolf's carcass on a workbench to process the meat. Without wasting time, he plunges a sharp knife into the animal's belly and begins to pull off the hide. But the job proves to be quite exhausting, showing that doing it all alone is harder than watching his grandfather work. Wiping sweat from his face, Jo-won cuts a nice piece of meat and decides to try a different method later. Satisfied with the result, he tells himself it's time to finish the task once and for all. A moment later, Lizzie appears, walking toward the house's exit and calling her husband's name. The guy turns his head upon hearing the sweet voice echoing from outside. Holding a large wooden bucket, she slowly approaches and calmly calls his name again. Placing the container on the ground, the woman asks him to put the meat inside, leaving the big guy a bit confused. He quickly understands the request through her gestures, realizing her intention is to collect the hunt. Scratching his chin, the protagonist racks his brain, trying to remember how to pronounce the word, "thank you," in that different language. He says the term with some difficulty, completely surprising his young wife in the middle of the yard. Lizzie is speechless for a moment, her cheeks flushing at the sudden thank you. Seeing her silence, the outsider scratches the back of his neck, worried that he butchered the pronunciation. However, the woman soon smiles warmly and points to herself, confirming the word in a very helpful way. In a quick motion, Jo-won takes a wide step, closing the distance between them. He returns the smile and offers a new, much more confident, "thank you." Replying that it was nothing, the woman looks away, feeling her heart race with him so close. The guy goes back to putting the meat in the bucket while his wife nervously adjusts her clothes. Helping with the work, she thinks that she only brought an empty container, not understanding why he's so grateful for something so simple. Crouching side by side, the woman feels embarrassed, remembering that this is the first time she's experiencing so many new things with someone. Lizzie feels her face burn. She remembers the unexpected kiss they shared moments ago. Walking back to the house, she tries to deal with the overwhelming embarrassment, but her curiosity gets the better of her. Pressing her hands to her chest, the young woman wonders if the outsider has ever touched another woman's lips in the same way. Faced with so many mixed feelings, the girl feels like crying as her heart pounds uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Jo-won rests his hands on his knees, taking a short break from the hard work. Watching the scene from a distance, she finds his behavior very strange, as women usually handle this task. Carrying 2 wooden bowls, the wife wonders why this man acts as if preparing the meat is a natural thing for him to do. As she hands him the bowls, Lizzie notices her husband leaning toward her without saying a word. With him getting closer and closer, the young woman panics, believing she's about to be kissed again in broad daylight. Completely frozen, she just squeezes her eyes shut, waiting for the sudden touch. The guy's face passes inches from her shoulder in a very gentle and affectionate way. Jo-won places a soft kiss on the top of his wife's head, showing genuine affection. Mortified by his impulsive action, the big guy pulls back, calling himself an idiot and wondering why she closed her eyes. An awkward silence hangs in the air, with the outsider avoiding eye contact as he holds the bucket. The young woman holds her head, horrified that she acted like a desperate person expecting a kiss on the lips. Determined to clear up the misunderstanding, the outsider calmly approaches her again. Determined not to be embarrassed, Lizzie's eyes fly open as she vows to keep them wide open this time. But Jo-won surprises her by holding her face with both hands and giving her a real, affectionate kiss. The couple slowly parts, savoring the moment of pure intimacy. Still a bit dazed by the situation, the guy grabs the bucket handles and takes a step back, asking for Dorothy. Hiding in the doorway of the house, the little girl peeks at them with a look of pure enchantment, having witnessed the entire display of affection. Turning completely red upon noticing her daughter, the woman flees into the cabin in a total panic. A little later, the small family walks peacefully through the shaded forest. Jo-won leads the group with the heavy bucket, closely followed by the little girl, with the mother bringing up the rear. The big guy smiles and offers a sincere thank you for their help. Seeing that the child didn't respond, he figures that not using her name made it hard for her to understand. Stopping in the middle of the path, the protagonist tries again and clearly calls for Dorothy, thanking her for her assistance on the trip. Radiant at being called that, the little girl smiles, holding the edge of the container, full of energy and pride. Later in the cabin, Lizzie strokes the enormous animal hide stretched out on the living room floor. Sitting in the back of the room, the guy finds it strange that the drying process is happening in an enclosed space due to the strong smell the hide gives off. Suddenly, he connects the dots and understands her decision to keep the piece hidden inside. The outsider concludes that the hide of a beast that size is certainly a valuable item for the family's reserves. After finishing her work with the material, the young woman gets up and looks at her daughter playing. Dorothy is lying very relaxed on top of the monstrous snout, showing no trace of fear of the creature. The mother lets out a soft, sweet laugh, amused by the little girl's calmness around the slain animal. Jo-won joins in the light-hearted mood, smiling with satisfaction to see his family so happy and safe in his presence. The residence exudes a sense of calm, isolated among the trees under the bright afternoon light. Tending to the food, Lizzie sprinkles salt over the pieces of red meat, storing the supplies in a larger container. Her movements carefully, the protagonist memorizes the preservation technique, intending to take over this task in the future. Happy to have saved the salt, the wife rubs the seasoning into the meat, very relieved to have plenty of food available. With his arms crossed, the big guy reflects on the endless amount of basic knowledge he needs to master in this place. Staring at the valuable hide on the floor, he decides he will quickly learn the rules of buying and trading goods in the outside world. Determined to stop just resting, Jo-won gets to his feet to return to his daily chores. The sudden movement startles Lizzie, who turns around, nervously interrupting her work with the meat. Waving gently, the husband asks the young woman to remain seated, assuring her that he doesn't intend to disrupt her household chores. Jo-won waves his hands in denial, assuring her he's rested enough, feels no pain, and is perfectly fine now. Reassuring his wife with a gentle touch on her shoulder, he tells her he won't overdo it and asks her to stop worrying. With that, the outsider turns and walks outside, leaving the young woman silently watching him go. Now in the middle of the forest, the big guy eyes a tree, judging its size to be perfect for practicing his wood cutting. Holding the axe firmly, he remembers that oak is good for burning but admits he doesn't even know what one looks like. Even without experience, he fully trusts his own strength. Without wasting time, he delivers a heavy blow against the trunk, sending wood chips flying everywhere. The impact of the blade echoes loudly through the woods, demonstrating the weight of the swing. After a lot of continuous effort, the protagonist wipes the sweat from his brow panting and has to lean on the tool's handle to rest. Completely exhausted, he learns firsthand that felling trees requires much more technique than just raw muscle. The afternoon soon draws to a close, covering the small wooden cabin in the warm light of the setting sun. Opening the door to the house, Jo-won enters, carrying a basket full of firewood on his back after finishing the day's hard work. Lizzie's eyes widen slightly in surprise as her husband arrives, while little Dorothy hides behind her mother. Worried about the weight, the woman quickly runs toward him, wanting to help with the load. The guy sits on the floor, completely exhausted as he unloads the firewood, but he's confused when his wife kneels beside him. Gently wiping her husband's sweaty face with a cloth, she takes care of him while the big guy tries to tell her he's fine. Thanking her affectionately for her care, he leaves the young woman speechless, simply enjoying the quiet moment under Dorothy's watchful eye. Suddenly, the little girl runs hastily down the hallway, her little feet pattering on the wooden floor. She goes to a basin full of clean water and eagerly dunks a piece of cloth into it. Immediately after, the child runs back as fast as she can, dripping water all over the floor. In a sudden leap, Dorothy slaps the soaking wet cloth right onto the outsider's face, startling the couple with her abrupt action. With water dripping down his hair, Jo-won freezes in place, not understanding what just happened. Taking the cloth from his face, he realizes the girl's good intentions, while Lizzie panics, waving her hands in an attempt to apologize. The little girl stares at the man with big, shining eyes, eagerly awaiting a positive reaction for her help. Melted by her cuteness, the protagonist gently strokes her head and gives a very sincere thank you. Excited by the compliment, the little one runs back to get more water, making the big guy desperately plead for her to stop. After calming the situation, he holds his wife's hands affectionately and confesses that this whole peaceful life feels like a dream. Until recently, he swore he would never experience such happiness, which is why he wants to do everything he can to keep a smile on both of their faces. Falls over the forest, bringing a cool breeze, while the tranquil sounds of nature surround the isolated cabin. Thick smoke rises from the stone chimney, proving that the inside of the residence is warm and cozy. Gathered in the middle of the candlelit room, the three of them share a hearty dinner together for the first time. After the meal, the couple directs their attentive gazes to the opposite side of the room, enjoying the silence. Completely exhausted after a hectic day, little Dorothy has already passed out on the floor, wrapped in blankets. The husband is amused by the adorable scene and exchanges a knowing look with his wife. Very carefully, so as not to wake the child, Jo-won gently lifts her into his arms. Holding the girl firmly, he waits for the young woman to get ready so they can end the night together. The outsider walks slowly to the made bed near the lit fireplace, keeping the room nice and warm. With extreme caution, he places the little girl on the soft mattress and pulls the blanket up to keep her protected from the cold. Outside, darkness dominates the silent forest, with only the faint light from the house's window remaining. Near the kitchen, Lizzie washes the dinner dishes, dipping the containers into a basin of water. As she finishes cleaning the utensils, she feels her husband's presence quietly approaching from behind. The guy reaches out and gently holds the woman's wrist, stopping her from continuing her work. Surprised by the sudden touch, the young woman turns, feeling her heart race and her face flush instantly. Maintaining a calm demeanor, the protagonist looks into her eyes, waiting for his wife's full attention. Bathed in the dim light of the room, the two stand in the middle of the room in a moment of pure intimacy and tension. Closing any remaining distance, the big guy pulls her in by the waist, enveloping the young woman in a firm, protective hug. Resting his face near her hair, he tightens the embrace, enjoying the warmth and peace of that moment. Completely red-faced, Lizzie swallows her shyness, assuring herself that this is the natural way a wife should act. Mustering her courage, the young woman raises her trembling hands and touches her husband's chest, her fingers sliding over his clothes. The outsider watches her effort to return the affection with a calm and understanding gaze. Happy with the young woman's small initiative, he gives a fond smile, feeling his chest warm. But her courage is short-lived, and she abruptly turns her face away, covering her cheeks, unable to bear the immense embarrassment. Quickly, Jo-won takes his wife's hands before she can try to escape the situation again. Keeping them close, the guy seeks direct eye contact, leaving the woman even more nervous and vulnerable. Tilting his head, he places a soft kiss on her cheek and tells his wife it's time to go to sleep. The last candle in the room is extinguished, plunging the small cabin into the deep shadows of the nocturnal forest. Arranging the blankets on the floor, the big guy lies down comfortably next to Lizzie to rest together. He places the unlit lamp in a corner, while the woman watches him silently in the dim light. Covering himself, the protagonist turns on his side, settling in to finally end the exhausting day. Lying on her back, the woman lets out a long, relieved sigh, feeling her face burn with so much happiness. Even with his back to her, Jo-won keeps his eyes open, lost in his own thoughts as he listens to his wife's breathing. The two of them sleeping peacefully beside him, Jo-won's heart softens at the peaceful sight. Accepting that this woman is truly his wife, he mentally pleads for them to never leave this world before he does. Begging any higher power, the guy asks for his new family to remain happy until his very last day. Far away, in the grand castles of wealthy nobles, people would never understand the reality of living in such a small space. In the homes of commoners, it is extremely common for all the children to grow up sharing the exact same room as their parents. Because of this lack of space, it becomes impossible to hide from the children how a married couple really spends their nights together. Trapped in her own memories, the young woman remembers the terrifying voice of her former father threatening to hit her if she kept crying. Hidden under the covers, little Lizzie would spend her nights listening to her mother's stifled cries until dawn. That cruel routine made fear the most constant feeling throughout her painful childhood. Back in the present, she confesses that she has always been terrified of inheriting the same miserable fate and living surrounded by sadness. Interrupting her dark thoughts, the woman slowly opens her eyes, feeling a completely new sensation. The relaxing sound of wood crackling in the fireplace fills the dark room, bringing unexpected comfort. Unsure of when she ended up on the soft bed, the woman is certain she fell asleep on the hard floor of the house. Staring at her sleeping husband's serene face, she realizes with emotion that he even gave her his own arm to use as a pillow. Cuddled and protected, Lizzie hugs the outsider tightly, feeling a true peace she never thought possible. The next morning, Jo-won wakes up with both of them in his arms and feels an enormous sense of relief, confessing that his married nights in the past were never this sweet. Basking in the warmth of that hug, he is certain that the whole world has been changing for the better since he met this woman. But suddenly, the guy slowly opens his eyes when he hears a slight movement nearby. He looks down, a little surprised by the scene. Lizzie snuggles even closer to her husband's chest, murmuring softly and cutely, making the big guy feel like his heart is going to explode. With his chest tingling with so much happiness, the outsider wishes from the bottom of his soul that this moment could last forever. Time passes, and the morning light begins to stream into the small cabin through the cracks in the window. With that, the protagonist gets up very carefully and covers them both to keep the cold out. Before getting out of bed, he affectionately strokes his wife's head, and she lets out a soft murmur, enjoying the touch. A little later, the young woman is already up and walking through the kitchen holding an empty bucket to start her daily chores. However, she gets a big scare when someone suddenly grabs the bucket's handle. Turning around, startled, she realizes it's just her husband wanting to help with the chores. Without any effort, the guy lifts a huge cauldron and pours out all the heavy water at once. He then looks at his wife and says something in a completely unknown language. The woman doesn't understand a single word he just said. Noticing her confusion, Jo-won asks if she slept well, calling her darling, which makes her face turn beet red and freeze up completely. She nods her head very quickly, while the guy wonders if it was the term of endearment that caused such a nervous reaction. Racking his memory, he recalls recently learning a few words like wife and darling from another local resident. Previously, the outsider had asked what he should call the young woman, suggesting using her name, but he only got silence in return. At that moment, Lizzie had been mortified and asked in her native tongue to be called darling, which finally made it click for her husband. Deciding to test his theory, he calls her darling one more time, and the woman hides her face, burning with embarrassment. Unable to handle the pressure, the young woman turns her back, trying to compose herself from the heart attack. Finding her reaction the cutest thing in the world, the protagonist feels an overwhelming urge to tease his wife a little more. He points to her back and asks his darling to look at him, making the woman jump in surprise. But just then, little Dorothy leaps out from under the covers, newly awake and full of energy. The little girl stares into space with a sleepy look and starts drooling, imagining a nice piece of meat flying in front of her. Without a second thought, the child throws herself onto the floor, already crawling on her belly to get her food. She gets up and runs through the house, while the big guy greets her by name. But the girl runs right past, completely ignoring the couple, leaving Jo-won looking like a fool. With her eyes shining with hunger, the little one screams, demanding to eat meat first thing in the morning. Clinging to the wooden bucket, the child continues to stomp her feet, demanding her food while her parents laugh at the scene. Amused by all that energy, the guy repeats her request, trying to calm the little hungry girl. However, Dorothy nearly climbs all the way into the bucket, kicking her little legs and screaming nonstop. Laughing out loud at the situation, the protagonist decides it's time to work hard at hunting to feed his new family. He walks calmly through the dense forest, prepared to face another giant wolf, if necessary. Sizing up the sharp axe in his hand, the outsider feels confident for finally having brought a real weapon into the woods. He continues to advance through the trees, his steps firm on the dirt ground. Suddenly, the hunter stops walking when he notices the surrounding environment has become bizarrely dark. Looking around, he wonders where that heavy atmosphere is coming from. Gripping the axe handle tightly, the guy feels a strange shortness of breath despite being in such a wide, open space. With a grim expression, Jo-won mentally prepares himself, imagining what kind of monster is going to jump out at him now. But instead of a roar, he hears calm, rhythmic footsteps approaching on the trail. The big guy is confused and focuses his vision on the mysterious figure that has just emerged from the forest shadows. A man covered in a dark cloak walks toward him without any sense of urgency. Revealing himself to be an older, bearded man, the stranger stares at the protagonist with a deep and mysterious gaze. Feeling the strong tension of the moment, Jo-won breaks into a cold sweat in front of that presence and mentally wonders who this mysterious fellow could be. Tracking the ground, the old man deduces that a giant beast passed through here. The hunter soon notices blood trails on the rocks and confirms his suspicion. Remembering the big lumberjack, the old-timer reflects that the newbie didn't even know how to hold an axe properly. But surprisingly, that guy with no hunting sense took down a huge monster. Shocked by the scene, he knows even a professional hunter would struggle to kill that without a weapon. With a heavy sigh, the man is completely intrigued by the mystery. To prove his theory, he decides to investigate the area more closely. Walking in front, the hunter leads our protagonist through the dark forest. Suddenly, the old man stares at the wounds on the boy's arm. Through the bite marks, it's obvious it was a giant wolf attack. However, the wound is too clean, which doesn't make the slightest sense. In a normal attack, bones and muscles should have been completely shredded. Not to mention our little protagonist should have kicked the bucket with a weird fever from the beast's saliva. Since the boy moves around easily, only one explanation remains in the old man's head. In this world, mages exist, and the geezer thinks he got lucky running into one. With a sinister smile, the old man celebrates that his chance has finally arrived. For years he thought he'd end up in a coffin before getting his revenge. Confused by that weird silence, our boy wonders what kind of person this is. Today the hunter might just be a washed-up old man, but in his youth, he had plenty of vigor. In the old days, if a forest ranger stood out enough, he could even become an advisor to the local lord. Focused on climbing the social ladder, the young man left his father behind and became an independent hunter. Quickly, the guy became the official lumberjack for a resource, Rich Mountain Village. The only big problem was managing to collect quality firewood. Since any common resident could enter the lord's forest, the guy had to go deeper into the mountain. At that time, he thought it was a golden chance to scout the terrain. Little did the poor guy know the real reason people only gathered wood at the edge of the forest. To close a fancy contract, the lumberjack needed to have all his limbs intact. Fallen on the ground all bruised up, he realizes he lost the job of his dreams. Scared in the middle of the woods, the young hunter had no idea of the danger hidden there. Emerging from the shadows, terrifying goblins reveal that the mountain already had an owner. These disgusting creatures usually kidnap human women to procreate. Because of this disgrace, the village was left practically without women in the region. Suffering constant attacks, the place became known as the Goblin Village. After a miserable life, the man survived only by the will to get revenge. Foaming with hatred, he spent decades living among the jerks who ruined his future. With a single goal in his head, he promised to burn the nest of those pests until nothing was left. Staring at our protagonist, the old man is sure this guy has the power needed to clear the mountain. Having a giant's physique and absurd strength, the boy is the perfect weapon. Besides that, the monstrous regeneration of the wolf wound leaves the geezer jaw dropped. Without a shadow of a doubt, the newbie can become the greatest monster hunter ever seen. Currently, the goblins are hiding deep in the mountain, but they'll soon attack the village again. Till then, the geezer's plan is to turn our boy into a ruthless combat machine. To make sure the bait doesn't run away, he needs to hide the goblin mess until the official contract is signed. Agreeing to something he didn't even understand, the prota bows his head politely. Even while bowing, the old man notices the big guy keeps a perfect center of gravity and doesn't lower his guard. Full of hidden intentions, the master warns that from today on he will teach everything he knows. Completely confused by the language, the boy just listens in silence. In the blink of an eye, dawn breaks at the cabin and the prota gets ready to leave. Bags packed, he adjusts his clothes, focused on another day of hard work. Outside, the mysterious old man is already waiting at the door without invading the house. Because the hunter respects him by not entering, the boy is relieved for the safety of his wife and daughter. Soon the big guy walks out the door, bumping into the hooded figure. Turning his face, the old-timer flashes a super suspicious smile. Faced with that look, the prota is instantly reminded of a manager trying to scam you out of your salary. Putting his backpack on, our boy decides to focus on learning to hunt and ignores the fakeness. Suddenly, his wife's sweet voice calls out his name from inside the cabin. After saying he'll be back soon, the prota comes across the young woman trying to prepare a clumsy lunchbox. With blushing cheeks, the boy finds her attitude way too cute. Right beside them, little Dorothy watches everything very quietly. But in a burst of energy, the little girl shakes her head frantically, grabbing the big guy's attention. With quick steps, the woman hands the lunchbox over with plenty of affection. Surprised by the care, he takes the package while she asks him to eat well. With a wide smile, our protagonist feels like the luckiest guy in the world to have a family like this. Making a huge effort, the young woman wishes him a safe trip and that he returns in one piece. Because of her slurred accent, the boy quickly gets the meaning of the farewell. Swearing he'll return early, he returns a reassuring look. At this, little Dorothy jumps to get his attention again and leaves the big guy confused. Copying her mother, the little brat lets out a hilarious shout wishing him a good trip. Melted by so much cuteness, our prota waves and says he'll be back in a heartbeat. With the door closed, the guy already suffers from homesickness, thinking he never wanted to leave home again. Remembering the smiles of his wife and daughter keeps the brute's heart nice and warm. Long after, the two keep walking through the dense forest in a tense silence. Dripping with sweat, the newbie finds the delay strange and starts thinking that stroll is taking way too long. Out of nowhere, the old man stops walking and speaks a few words in his weird language. Pointing to the ground, the hunter gestures to his own feet, making the prota wonder what kind of crazy lesson that is. With a sudden movement, the geezer turns his back and marches through the brush with heavy steps. Completely in shock, our prota widens his eyes and sweats coldly without understanding a thing. Focused on the dirt trail, the boy notices the trick and reflects that those old man's footprints are way too abnormal.